Welcome back to RJ Recape. Today, we're diving into the magical world of Cinderella, a timeless story filled with kindness, dreams, and a little bit of magic. After losing her parents, Ella is forced to live under the cruel rule of her stepmother and stepsisters. But even in the darkest moments, she never loses hope or her kind heart. Everything changes when a mysterious old woman, a magical transformation, and a royal ball give her one chance to change her destiny forever. Will Cinderella find happiness, or will midnight end her dreams before they begin? Stay with us as we explore this beautiful fairy tale of courage, kindness, and true love. At the beginning of the movie, we see a happy family. A girl named Ella lives a very happy life with her parents in a small house deep in the forest, and everything is going well. However, one day, Ella's mother falls seriously ill and passes away. Before she dies, she makes Ella promise to always be kind to everyone and to stand by or help anyone facing difficulty. Long time passed after Ella's mother's death, and we see that Ella had grown up. Then one day, Ella's father married a widow and brought her home. She had 2 daughters of her own. Ella did not like the situation at all, but she accepted it for the sake of her father's happiness. Upon arriving at the house, her stepmother immediately organized. However, Ella felt quite uncomfortable at the party, so she went off to spend time with some of her animal friends. Later, when she returned to her father, she learned that he would be leaving town the next day. Ella's stepmother, Tremaine, overhears them and becomes intensely jealous witnessing such an emotional, loving moment between father and daughter. She simply cannot tolerate the bond they share. Anyway, once Ella's father leaves, we see Tremaine's true colors. Immediately after he departs, she takes Ella's room away and gives it to her own 2 daughters, forcing Ella to move into the attic, the highest part of the house. That is where Ella stays with her animal, our work. This led to an emotional conversation between them. She began living with friends. Although staying there was quite difficult for Ella, she was nonetheless happy at the thought that she wouldn't have to see her stepfather and stepmother constantly, unlike when she lived downstairs, where frequent encounters were inevitable. Here, she wouldn't see them as often. However, she was mistaken. Her things took a turn for the worse the day the servant returned alone with the news that Ella's father had fallen ill and died on the road. So, on top of the already dire situation they were facing while he was alive, he was now gone. You can well imagine the kind of agony Ella was about to endure. Upon hearing the news of her father's death, Ella felt the ground slip from beneath her feet. It seemed as though the entire world had come to a standstill. On one hand, there was the death of her father. Other and apart from her distress, she was terrified at the prospect of living with the people her father had brought into the house, given the kind of people they were. We can well imagine what might be happening to Ella now. In any case, to save money, Ella's stepmother dismissed all the servants and left the responsibility of all the housework to Ella. From washing clothes and cleaning dishes to cooking, Ella had to do everything herself. Her daughters soon started tormenting Ella again. For instance, they would use sweet words to trick her into doing the work of a maid. Even worse. At the end of the day, whatever food was left on the table fell to Ella's lot, food she would share with her mouse friends. Moreover, after a long day's work, climbing all those stairs to reach the upper loft for the night was an arduous task for Ella. On top of that, it was bitterly cold up there. Consequently, Ella began sleeping on the kitchen floor right in front of the fire. I saw that Ella's face got ash or black because she slept in front of the kitchen fire. And then Ella's stepmother and her sisters started calling Ella Cinderella. And Cinderella, Ella got so fed up with all this that one day Ella got angry and she spots a deer. We see that the prince and his attendants had come to hunt that very deer. Upon seeing this, Ella urges the deer to flee. Then we see Ella lose control of her horse as it gallops wildly. Seeing this, the prince rushes to her aid. However, he introduces himself merely as a servant, specifically a servant from the royal palace. Her horse into the forest. But still Ella likes Rajkumar a lot, and they talk. But Ella leaves without telling Rajkumar her name. On the other hand, when Rajkumar comes to the palace, he comes to know that his father or the king is very ill, and the king requests his son Rajkumar that there will be a royal ceremony very soon, and there you have to choose a wife for yourself, so that I can leave all the responsibilities on you and be at ease. Hearing this, Rajkumar says that in the royal ceremony, all citizens of the kingdom, including the maids, were summoned. Notably, Ella had identified herself as a maid, so the prince had ordered that all the maids in the kingdom be brought along as well, hoping that if Ella were among them, he might encounter her. The king had invited everyone, rich or poor, ordinary citizens or domestic workers, to the royal event. Ella heard this news and hurried home to tell her stepmother, Tremaine, so that they could attend the royal function. The mood was very cheerful. However, we see Ella's stepmother, instead of thinking about Ella, busy dressing up her own daughters and preparing them to attend the royal event. She muses that the prince might well take a liking to one of her two daughters, and if by chance he did choose one of them, their lives would be transformed. The next scene shifts to the royal palace. We see the prince so preoccupied with thoughts of Ella that he cannot focus on any of his tasks but his. Deep down, she also feared whether her father would accept Ella. After all, a king would naturally want to choose a wealthy woman or a princess for the prince. Anyway, we then see that although Ella's stepmother decks out her own daughters in expensive gowns, she gives Ella nothing to wear, implying she has no desire for Ella to attend. Yet, Ella was keen on going to that royal event. So we see Ella begin to alter one of her mother's old dresses with the help of her mouse friends. Then, on the night of the event, just as Ella's stepmother and stepsisters were ready to leave for the event, Ella appeared, dressed in her mother's gown. However, her stepmother and stepsisters subjected her to cruel insults and even tore her dress to prevent her from attending. They then set off for the event, leaving a heartbroken Ella behind to watch them go. After they left, Ella sat by a pond and wept bitterly. Then, she met an elderly woman who offered to take her to the event. However, Ella was skeptical of the woman's words. Just then, the elderly woman transformed into a beautiful woman and told Ella, "I am your fairy godmother." That is when we see the fairy use her magic to transform a pumpkin into a carriage. She turns two mice into horses, a lizard into a guard, and a goose into a coachman, creating a complete royal carriage fit for a princess. But then Ella asks, "How can I go in this outfit?" So the fairy changes her clothes as well. As she steps into the carriage, her shoes are transformed into glass slippers. But Ella pointed out that her stepmother and stepsisters were there, and they might cause trouble for her. So the fairy cast a spell on Ella that would prevent them from recognizing her. However, she warned Ella that the magic would only last until midnight, meaning 12 a.m., after which she would revert to her original state. This meant that, no matter the difficulty, she had to leave before the clock struck 12. He had to return early. Next, we see Ella setting out quickly for the royal palace. Upon arrival, she finds the local residents as well as princesses from other kingdoms gathered for the event. However, the person the prince was waiting for had not yet arrived. Consequently, even amidst so many beautiful young women, the prince felt no particular spark. His mind was elsewhere. The king noticed this, and anticipating that his father might question him about it, the prince cleverly devised a plan. The princess is summoned for a conversation. Just as the event is about to begin, Ella makes her entrance, immediately drawing everyone's gaze. The prince, too, looks at her. Overcome with immense joy at the sight, he steps forward to meet her. The crowd parts to make way for the two of them. Yet, the prince was still waiting for Ella. It is worth noting here that the fact Ella was coming to the royal palace was something the prince's wife was not meant to be. You see, when Ella met the prince in the forest, he had actually introduced himself as a servant from the royal palace. So, Ella was desperate to come here primarily to see that palace servant. When she finally saw him standing before her, she was overjoyed. However, she was also disconcerted, wondering why everyone was staring at them. She even asked the prince about it, and he replied, "They are all," admiring her beauty. Then the two of them began to dance. This was one of the movie's cutest moments, and everyone wondered who this unknown girl dancing with the prince was. All eyes were fixed on them. Even Ella's stepmother failed to recognize her. Seeing the prince so drawn to her, the stepmother grew incredibly jealous and sent her own daughters to dance with him, but to no avail. Eventually, after the dance ended, the prince took Ella away with him right in front of everyone. He takes her away, and that is when Ella discovers he is actually a prince, not a servant. She is utterly astonished, but the prince asks her to calm down and apologizes. Seeing Ella's deep affection for the person she believed to be a servant makes the prince fall even more madly in love with her. After all, she had no idea he was royalty, yet she cared for him so deeply, and this only intensified his attraction to her. Meanwhile, the entire palace was abuzz with talk about this girl, as no one knew where she had come from. Then he took Ella to his secret garden, a place where he had never taken anyone before. There, he pushed her on the swing. Just then, one of Ella's shoes slipped off, and the prince himself sat on the ground to put it back on her foot. He then tried to learn her identity. But just then, Ella realized it was almost midnight. Without saying another word to the prince, she started running away, and the prince ran right after her. However, before leaving the palace, Ella met the king and told him just one thing, that his son was a truly good man and loved her deeply. Then, she ran outside while the king watched her go. As she was running down the stairs, one of her shoes slipped off her foot, and the prince, who was close behind. So she hopped onto her ride without taking her shoe. Consequently, the prince found the shoe and was about to go after her when the commander arrived. He left the prince behind and set out after Ella with the rest of the soldiers. Then the clock struck midnight, and everything about Ella began to change. Seeing this, the chameleon closed the gate to block the soldiers. As they escaped, leaving the soldiers behind, everyone reverted to their original forms, except for Ella's shoe. And as you know, the other shoe. The prince already has it, so Ella walks back home. Meanwhile, it starts to rain. Suddenly, she sees her stepsisters approaching. Upon seeing this, she quickly rushes inside and hides the shoe. Ella is so excited about the whole incident that she hurriedly finishes her chores and begins writing everything down in her diary. The scene then shifts back to the royal palace, where we see that the king is in very poor health. He wants to fulfill the duty that every father performs for his son before his life comes to an end. So, the king grants permission for the prince to marry the girl he has chosen. He tells the prince to find and marry her as soon as possible. Having said this, the king passes away. Subsequently, the prince becomes the new king and announces to the people that he will marry the woman who can produce the matching shoe. The prince has one shoe, meaning the other one is with its rightful owner, the very girl he wishes to marry. Hearing this, Ella is overjoyed and rushes home to look for her shoe, only to discover that her stepmother has already taken it. Her stepmother then tells Ella that she will allow the marriage to the prince to go ahead only if Ella takes everyone along to the royal palace. Takes it away. She intends to marry off her own daughters to wealthy young men. Ella, however, refuses to agree to this. Her stepmother takes the shoe, locks it in a room, and leaves. Later, we see Ella's stepmother striking a deal with someone from the royal palace involving a broken piece of the shoe. That person then takes the broken fragment from the stepmother and shows it to the prince, telling him that the girl who owns the shoe had deliberately. He has kept her hidden. He claims that he, the man, does not love or want you, or something to that effect. However, the prince refuses to listen. He insists that the girl must be found at any cost. But the man then makes the prince promise that if the girl cannot be located, he will marry the woman his father had chosen for him before his death. The prince agrees to this. The truth is, Ella's stepmother did not want Ella to marry the prince under any circumstances. In other words, it wouldn't be a problem if the marriage to his daughter didn't take place. However, he would not let Rajkumar meet Ella under any circumstances. Regardless, Rajkumar agreed to the man's terms. Subsequently, the man told Rajkumar to stay at the royal palace. He then personally led the soldiers from house to house, gathering all the young women and lining them up to try on the shoe. They try the shoe on everyone, but it doesn't fit anyone. Eventually, they arrive at Ella's house and attempt to fit the shoe onto her stepsisters. Meanwhile, Ella has been locked inside the house to prevent anyone from reaching her with the shoe. But as you know, she has many animal friends, and one of them comes along and opens the window to her room. Just then, instead of coming outside, Ella began to sing from where she was. The king's commander, who was a good man, asked the stepmother to call out the girl whose voice was being heard from the house. However, the stepmother claimed there was no one there and insisted that the commander leave. Meanwhile, the prince, who had disguised himself as a soldier and was observing everything from within the ranks, heard Ella's song and revealed himself to everyone. Then, the wicked man and Ella's mother are left astonished. Subsequently, we see the prince order his commander to bring Ella to him. When the prince and Ella meet, he proposes to her and slips the shoe onto her foot. Finally, Ella sets off for the royal palace with the prince. However, before leaving, she forgives her stepmother and stepsisters, honoring the promise she made to her mother, who had taught her to always be kind to everyone. In the final scene, we see Ella marry the prince, and they live happily ever after. That is where the movie concludes. All in all, it is one of Disney's best romantic films. You won't get the full experience just by watching a summary of it. To truly experience this movie, you have to watch it yourself. Nevertheless, an attempt has been made to offer a small taste of it. I know it didn't turn out very well, but I am wrapping up the video here and asking for your forgiveness.